Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast is listener-supported independent media. The website is aroundtheempire.com. If you can, please pitch in patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. And please help me build up the YouTube channel by subscribing. That's free at youtube.com/c/aroundtheempire. Today, former Army intelligence analyst and whistleblower Chelsea Manning was jailed for contempt of court. She's resisting testimony in front of a grand jury that's been convened in the Eastern District of Virginia to deal with sealed charges against Wikileaks Julian Assange. Manning said the matter was related to her 2010 disclosures. She's already spent 7 years in prison, before and after being convicted by a military tribunal on her leaking of material related to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her sentence was commuted by President Obama before leaving office in 2017. Journalist and filmmaker Ford Fischer was at the courthouse today, and he's here today to tell us about it. Ford Fischer is an independent videographer and editor, a computer scientist, and web designer. He's the editor-in-chief and co-founder of news2share.com. His work's been featured on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, ABC, and more. He also does freelance work as a videographer and journalist. In protestation, WikiLeaks made statements and published other people's statements on Twitter today. They said, quote, "This is America 2019, a secret trial against a source for refusing to testify against a journalist," unquote. And their lawyer Jen Robinson said, quote, "No journalist or their source should ever be subjected to this." WikiLeaks cited Glenn Greenwald's response, quote, "This is disgusting, and all due to the efforts of the DOJ to criminalize the publication of classified information in order to prosecute WikiLeaks and Assange, something all press freedom groups, major newspapers, and even the Obama DOJ said would be a major threat to press freedom," unquote. Pentagon Papers whistleblower Dan Ellsberg issued a statement calling for Chelsea Manning to be released. He called it a travesty, and he said, quote, "An investigation into WikiLeaks for publishing is a grave threat to all journalists' rights," unquote. He said that she suffered enough and should be released immediately. We recorded this on March 8th, 2019. Ford Fischer, welcome to Around the Empire, and thanks for coming on the show so soon after the Chelsea Manning hearing today. I'm sure you're getting bombarded, phone blowing up and all that, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I've had a few networks sort of reaching out for footage, but it's been about 4 hours since Chelsea has been incarcerated for the second time, I guess, in her life. There was one very lengthy term, which of course is what she is known for, and this is sort of her allowing herself to be taken back into the system rather than testify against Julian Assange.
Right. So we're here today because the judge found Chelsea Manning to be in contempt of court, and she's locked up again. All of this is related to the murky case against WikiLeaks, details of which were allegedly leaked by accident by the court staffers themselves, but still remain secret, even after some legal attempts to make those records or indictments public. Chelsea Manning, I'm sure that everyone knows who Chelsea Manning is, a former Army intelligence whistleblower, WikiLeaks source back in 2010. And so she was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury, and she has decided to fight that. And Ford was there today filming when Chelsea arrived at court. And we have some audio from those statements we'll play for you in a bit. And Ford was able to ask some questions himself of Chelsea before the hearings and then of her lawyers after the hearing. So Ford, let's give the audience a little bit of background on the story for those who might not have been following as we have. And after that, tell us what you learned today, and we can, on your cue, I have a couple audio clips. One's like 2 minutes and some. It's the statement Chelsea made before, and then another short clip of her lawyers today that you got. And then if we have time after that, lastly, I'd like to hear your take on the whole thing, the lowdown, so to speak, if that's okay with you.
Sure. So, of course, Chelsea Manning is the leaker who disclosed under the Obama administration many of the practices of the U.S. military, and that created a great level of controversy and embarrassment for the Obama administration and the military more broadly. And for that, she was sentenced. She was found guilty of a number of different things, but she was sentenced to 35 years in prison. And it's worth noting that the government had charged her as well with aiding the enemy, which was the one charge she was found not guilty on, but that would have been a capital crime. In other words, the government has literally tried to kill her, right, at one point.
Right.
And her sentence was commuted at the end of the Obama administration by Obama himself. So she did 7 years, which is nothing to scoff at. But Obama sort of had this show of mild mercy, if you will, at the end, which allowed her to be released. Now, Julian Assange, who's basically the administrator, the runner of WikiLeaks, is who Chelsea Manning actually released those documents to at the time. Assange himself has been in the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK since all of this has happened, which is how he has avoided extradition or arrest. As you pointed out earlier, the government is trying to prosecute Assange, which I think we all would have assumed anyway, but it was inadvertently described in a court document that they have already filed sealed charges against him. Now it appears that there is a new grand jury that's been convened, perhaps to lay out additional charges against him, perhaps creating a superseding indictment, but one way or another, trying to go after Julian Assange. Chelsea Manning was called to testify in front of this grand jury, and what she explained is she's not opposed to talking about WikiLeaks, right? She has testified for an entire day about it during her original trial. She's talked to the media about it. The problem that she really has here is that the grand jury process is a prosecutor and a grand jury, but it's not a sort of opposed or a balanced situation. It's the government versus nobody, right?
And it's secret, and it's
in secret,
and you can't,
right? So,
you can't have a lawyer with you either.
correct. So in her view, the problem is the lack of transparency and the one-sidedness of the process, not so much that she has some kind of big secret that she's not willing to share. In fact, it's not entirely clear that any of the questions would address anything that would be new, right?
Yeah, well, the whole thing is sealed. Like we're saying it's a WikiLeaks case and it's all this stuff, but technically nobody can say that as a fact because it's all secret, right? Like no one has even disclosed what this case is about. Or have they?
So I believe it was The Intercept somehow claimed to have confirmed that it is specifically about Assange. However, Chelsea Manning herself is not allowed to tell us that, right? She and her lawyers are not allowed to give any details about what the case was. She was allowed to, or she did, whether she was allowed to or not, she made a statement to the press which described that she asserted her First, Fourth, and Sixth Amendment rights as reasons not to testify in response to every single question. So to lay out a little timeline of what happened this week, on Tuesday, she was called in and she filed two motions. One motion was to quash the testimony, basically saying, I would like to have the legal authorization to not testify. And that was denied. No, Chelsea, you have to testify, says the judge, right? The other was to allow press in. Okay, fine. If I'm going to testify, will the media be allowed? And technically they deferred that, but it was effectively a rejection. It was the following day that they basically called her in and asked her the questions that they wanted her to answer. Now, the reason why she didn't assert the Fifth, which is the amendment of the Constitution that actually most accurately applies here, which is the right not to testify against oneself, is that the government basically played a little trick where they said, well, we'll grant you immunity, right? You're not testifying against yourself because you're immune from prosecution for whatever you tell us. So therefore, the Fifth Amendment doesn't apply. And the judge bought that argument, which is why she wasn't able to really assert her Fifth. So she asserts her First, Fourth, and Sixth Amendment in response to every single question as a reason not to answer it. So, of course, they're not happy with that. That's not testifying. And so that causes her to have a hearing, which was today, on whether or not to hold her in contempt of court. The state makes their case. We would like her to be held in contempt of court until she's willing to answer the questions. And Chelsea says, I would really like for that not to happen. And the government side won. So she was arrested in the courtroom today. And she could theoretically be held for as long as the grand jury is convened, or until she testifies, or until 18 months have passed, whatever is the shortest out of those three. She certainly is not going to testify, right? She said as much. She's gone pretty far. It's unlikely that she'd change her mind on that. So theoretically, it's until the grand jury ends, which there's no way to know, or 18 months.
Right. Yeah. There's a quote that shall be held, quote, until she purges or the end of the life of the grand jury, unquote. I was like, oh, what up? Yeah. So, but that's the legalese for what you just said. Yeah. She issued a couple of statements, which we can go over. So then I think we're up to date, right, with the timeline?
Yeah, so she did release a statement about a half hour ago at the time that we're recording this, which I'm happy to read if you would like. But
oh yeah, sure, why not?
Sure. Okay. So what Chelsea writes is, and I believe that she had this statement pre-formed before going in, because I asked her, if you go to jail, how will we know, right? Because you're not coming back out the front door. She said, we'll have a statement, and I ended up getting a statement from her lawyer anyway, which is how I confirmed it. But in any event, the statement that she seems to have pre-prepared was, I will not comply with this or any other grand jury. Imprisoning me for my refusal to answer questions only subjects me to additional punishment for my repeatedly stated ethical objections to the grand jury system. And by the way, that's basically what we were just talking about. It's the secrecy and the one-sidedness of it is what she's referring to. She says, the grand jury's questions pertain to disclosures from 9 years ago and took place 6 years after an in-depth computer forensics case in which I testified for almost a full day about these events. I stand by my previous public testimony. Again, this is re-exploring the fact that these things have already been talked about. She's already been on the record with them pretty extensively, and there's extensive evidence of what she did do. She finishes, I will not participate in a secret process that I morally object to, particularly one that has been historically used to entrap and persecute activists for protected political speech. And so that was her statement that she prepared. And at this point now, her Twitter page, which is at XYChelsea, is going to be run by her friends and volunteers with Chelsea Resists.
Right, right. So then you went to the courtroom today, and you were one of the only. There wasn't many press there, was there?
No, there was about 6 journalists total.
And you were the only one who stayed through the whole thing?
Well, I think I'm the only one who was there for both when she went in and also when her lawyers came out. So I did stay outside. There were basically everybody left after, but then some people came before when the decision was handed down. So yeah, I did stay through the entire thing.
Well, it's all over the headlines. So, since they weren't there, they must have been reporting from your video. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But anyway, so you were there when she arrived. This seems like a good time to play the audio clip of what she said before the hearing. Sound good?
Yep.
So I've been called back for my contempt hearing. It's a sealed hearing, so no press, no public. I can't really talk about the details of what's going on, but we're going to present a case and try to not be in contempt. I think we have good standing, but then again, we'll see how it goes.
And I saw your statement from last night, and you said that the reason why you're here, I guess, could you explain that a little bit more? Just sort of how you said you answered that it was a violation of your, first...
Right, first, fourth, and Sixth Amendment. Yeah, there we go.
And so is that why they asked you to come back?
Yes, so this today determines whether or not I get locked up, essentially, or whatever disposition the court decides, hopefully not for refusing to testify. I've already given an enormous amount of testimony in this case, and I see no reason why we should go over the same thing again.
Is there room for compromise on this? Like you say, that they can bring in things that you've said previous, or is it sort of hard line in the sand?
I don't believe in the grand jury process. I don't believe in the secrecy of this. I have no problem explaining what happened. I've done it before. Why we should go through this in a secret, closed hearing with only the prosecutor, no lawyer, and a grand jury that is barely able to behave or act independently.
And I guess more than anything, I mean, are you concerned going in there today? I mean, like you said, they could decide to, throw you in jail. So are you worried today going in there?
We're gonna present our case and see what happens. And unfortunately, it's closed. So, you're not gonna know the reasons why or what happens. So, at least for there's an unsealing hearing that's also going to be sealed probably in the next 2 weeks.
What does it say sort of about the state of our government when these kinds of hearings are conducted so sort of secretly and you're kind of not able to talk about certain aspects of them?
Well, I have a history of having to deal with secrecy, and a lot of these secret proceedings, they tend to favor the government. They tend to allow things, nefarious goings on to happen. So I am in general opposition of this kind of proceeding taking place.
Is the worst case scenario, is it possible that you aren't walking out those doors after this hearing? Could they get you today?
Yes.
How would we know? If you walk in there and then don't come out, how will we?
We'll put out a statement.
Okay, so that's the pre-hearing. And, we should also mention that she says she already did this once before, and you've mentioned that she was jailed, but I don't know if we mentioned that was in a military court.
Yes, yeah. It was a military tribunal that detained her for the first time.
Right. All right. So let's see. Should we go right to her lawyer statements then?
Sure.
Any comment today on what happened in there?
Well, it was certainly a typical outcome for this kind of proceeding. As everybody knows, Chelsea has tremendous courage. Our primary concern at this point is her health while she is confined, and we will be paying close attention.
Can you tell us what Judge Hilton did say?
Judge Hilton did find her in contempt in open court and did order her remanded to ADC.
Will you appeal the...
I think it's quite likely. This is an appealable order.
Did you get a chance to talk to Chelsea after the decision came down?
I did.
How's she doing?
As I said, Chelsea has tremendous courage.
What sort of timeline is there to something like this? How long could she potentially be held?
She can be held for the term of the grand jury and in no event longer than 18 months.
Can you state your name and the name of the firm that you work with?
My name is Maura Meltzer-Cohen, and I've been joined by local counsel Chris Leibig and local counsel Sandra Freeman.
Okay. And we should mention also the significant percentage of the audience of this podcast is international. So this courthouse is a federal courthouse, and it's the Eastern District of Virginia. And where is that, Alexandria or?
Yeah, it's Alexandria, Virginia. But for context, I live in Washington, D.C., and I was able to take the metro to get there. So it's in the broader Washington, D.C. area, but it is technically in Alexandria, Virginia.
Yeah, so that's just right over the bridge from downtown Washington, D.C., and it's Northern Virginia. But the other thing about the Eastern District of Virginia is that this is where all the intelligence, espionage, all the those types of cases the government brings, they seem to always bring them in this district. If it's a jury case, then, there's a very high chance that the jury is going to be government employees. And basically, I've heard this from John Kiriakou, who was actually in that court himself. And he said, basically, you don't really have any chance of winning. He cited a percentage of some ridiculously high percentage of people who get convicted. So you're going to jail, when you're in a court like this. Now, in Chelsea's case, they did offer some kind of an immunity deal, but I just thought I'd mention that just for reference. So what else do we know? We know that they're going to appeal, or they might appeal. She didn't actually commit to that.
Right.
Anything else that has happened that we should add in here?
Well, so I guess this is not necessarily a new happening, but it's worth noting that the lawyer said that her main concern now is Chelsea's health. And it is unfortunately true that Chelsea did attempt suicide twice when she was in prison the first time, and threatened on Twitter to commit suicide once, even in civilian life since then. So this will be a emotionally and physically draining scenario for her. and she is choosing to subject herself to it, but that doesn't lessen the degree of danger that a situation like this has for her. So it is not as simple as her waiting around for up to 18 months, right? This is something that could have a drastic effect on her health, and her lawyer expressed a commitment to sort of safeguarding her on that front, right? There could be legal proceedings over the way that they're treating her, as well as the simple fact of whether or not she should be confined.
Right. And I think it was fair. I was looking at her Twitter timeline. It was fairly recently that she was clearly going through a really difficult time.
Yeah.
Just like right around the middle of February. So it's recent. It's just a few weeks ago. I don't know how strong she is right now, but that's only a few weeks. And it is very worrying. Plus the fact that she's already been through the ringer for this exact same thing. She was in solitary confinement, ridiculous solitary confinement with, just maybe even just some kind of a light blanket and sometimes naked. Just terrible. I think I don't even want to say this though, but I know that some people consider it to be like torture. I don't know if there was a finding on that or not, but it was really bad.
Many people consider it to be torture, whether or not there's a state definition of torture that includes it, which would, of course, subject it to, constitutional prohibition. Psychologically, many people consider it to be torture.
Yeah, and I believe the UN has weighed in, certainly on Assange's conditions. I'm not sure if they did on Manning's or not. I can look that up. What do you think? What's the lowdown on this in your view?
Well, I mean, so like you said, although technically Manning hasn't been able to talk about it, it's certainly that they're trying to go after Assange. We already know that he's already been charged. So it seems like they're piling charges onto him, most likely. And I have to imagine that has him nervous, right? He is relying on the fact that Ecuador doesn't have an extradition agreement with the United States, but he's in an embassy of Ecuador in the UK, right? So he has four walls around him, and that's what's preventing him from being thrown into an American prison forever, right? And I imagine that has to be fairly daunting and intimidating. And I also think that it's a sort of remarkable amount of commitment that Manning has to this, given that she's already sort of sacrificed so much for Assange, that she is willing to subject herself to further jail time while Assange isn't, right? Theoretically, if Assange just sort of surrendered himself to the United States, Manning wouldn't probably be in this situation. And so she is extremely committed to sort of the principles that she had, which caused this to all start in the first place.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I think that to get him here, maybe they need her testimony to get him here, but I thought that, they're going to have to do some type of a trial for Assange, and I'm pretty sure they would.
Well, he's already
called
charged
her on that too.
Yeah, so he's already charged with crimes. We just don't know what exactly they are. And so if he was able to be extradited, piling more charges on probably wouldn't change that. But, we don't know. They might have some kind of a creative way to go after him. In spite of that, I guess at this point, it's just kind of who's to say.
Yeah, that's true. And politically, Chelsea Manning's she has a large support, a large group of support, or at least it appears that way. She started a legal defense fund for this, by the way, and I'll link that. Also, there's a relevant article that was written, I believe it was Whitney Webb on Mint Press News. And, they are pretty convinced, Whitney Webb is pretty convinced that Ecuador has come to some type of an agreement with the United States to take IMF money, and they are figuring out a way to revoke his citizenship and his asylum, which would clear the path for extradition to the United States. I guess maybe the UK could get involved then, but if the federal government is careful about what they charge him with, then they won't even be able to invoke we can't extradite someone who's charged with a capital crime. So yeah, I mean, they feel pretty convinced that this is imminent. So Anyway, All right. I started to say, so the political situation, though, she has a lot of support. But in terms of a sort of left wing, right wing type thing,
Uh-huh.
it's a it's sort of a very difficult position because we now have this resistance, if you will, so-called resistance, the the Russiagate people who now hate Chelsea Manning, who would normally have been her political allies. And then
Right.
we have, the patriotic right who think she's a traitor. So it's unclear who her base of support is going to be. I think
Yeah,
she's going to get some from the LGBT community. She's going to get people like me and the anti-interventionist.
sure. And so I've in posting extensively on this in the last week, I have seen plenty of right-wing dissenters, I guess, replying to my things. And those are sort of for the obvious reasons that, rah, 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 she, leaked against our military or her pledge to the military and whatever. So yeah, why some people in the right wing might oppose her, I think is probably goes without saying. Like you said, the center left, I think like the Democratic Party left, opposes her, or for that matter, opposes WikiLeaks because they see it as aiding Trump. But it's worth explaining that phenomena or that understanding of WikiLeaks as a phenomena really has existed since after her incarceration, right? It's not when she did these leaks. The leaks embarrassed the Obama administration, but really they embarrassed the military more so. Like Chelsea was always perceived as to Obama's left. Now Chelsea has really spent the last couple of years involved in really more of the far left community in Washington, D.C. She's been involved with the anti-fascist, anti-racist types of groups. She participated in a protest actually that I was at probably a year ago now against the prosecution of the J-20 defendants. These were the people who were charged with rioting at Trump's inauguration. She stood sort of in solidarity with them. So she's really found a home with mostly the far left, but she has also been hanging around at some more other libertarian or other kinds of non-neocon conservative or right-wing type events as well. So she does have some cross-political attraction, and there are some right-wingers who have attached themselves to the concept of WikiLeaks and transparency as a whole. So this is a little bit more of your libertarian style right wing, but there are some right wingers who now sort of see eye to eye with her, at least on the issues of transparency and things like that. So, but to your point, I think that as far as the broader population, as far as sort of popular support for her, this move probably goes against what she could have done, which is she could have built her base into the sort of center left. She could have become a hero to the Democratic Party or the quote unquote resistance, right? If she had helped to take down Julian Assange, right? There are plenty of Democrats who would have loved to see WikiLeaks destroyed, and she probably could have contributed to that. And she would have been regarded as a hero by people on the left for that. But she stood on her principle instead of on what would make her popular. And by the way, she's also in jail for it.
Yep. Again. Yeah. Well, if there are any other points that you want to make before we wrap up, please do that. And then tell everyone where to find your work and how to support your work.
So I guess I would just overall say that this story probably has an immense slowdown at this point, right? So the last 4 days have seen 3 hearings, the final of which just a few hours ago landed Chelsea Manning in jail, as we've been talking about. Her next hearing, though, is going to be in 2 weeks. There's going to be a hearing on the issue of whether or not to disclose some of the documents pertaining to this, such as the questions she was being asked and things like that, to the press. I'm not entirely convinced that will go in a positive way for the media, for the people who want to cover it, but theoretically, that's a hearing. Theoretically, an appeal will happen at some point, and then it could be as long as 18 months, right? So I'm going to keep staying on top of it. I'll keep track of it. I hope that whenever she is released, that I would really like to be there and film that happen. But in the meantime, you can follow me at Ford Fischer on Twitter. My page where I do live streams and raw video on Facebook is called News to Share. It's the same name on YouTube, where I also post raw video. And I support my work through Patreon, which is patreon.com/Ford Fischer, FORD FISCHER. And my work is totally kind of independently funded by viewers and Patreon contributors like you, as well as getting licensing fees from the mainstream media when they miss stories. So that doesn't happen all the time, but for example, today the mainstream media realized they missed this one, and so apparently Fox News is broadcasting my footage since they missed it, and apparently CBS needs it as well. So sometimes I get lucky, and some mainstream media outlets buy my stuff, but other than that, this work at least as a baseline is citizen funded.
All right. Well, thanks for the important work that you do, Ford, and thank you for coming on to talk to the show to talk to us. And take good care.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Ford Fischer. Follow Ford on Twitter at Ford Fischer, FORD-FICHER. Follow his news site at N2S Reports on Twitter and at news2share.com on the web. And also support his work at Patreon, patreon.com/Ford Fischer. The Around the Empire podcast, independent media. Your support is really important. If you can, please pitch in. Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire, PayPal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod, and you can find everything at AroundTheEmpire.com. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and if you like it, leave a good review. It helps with ranking and visibility. Follow us on Twitter at Around the Empire. And I'd like to thank everyone who's contributed to this effort to gather funding and resources for new kinds of content. It's very much appreciated, and truly every bit helps. Also, thank you to those who've sent feedback and suggestions. At the moment, emails and DMs on Twitter are the best way to reach me, but I'm also working on some new ways for us to communicate and some new methods of contributing to the show. So thank you so much. See you next time. Take care, everyone.